All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Destination the Show. This is episode 43. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We're getting down to it. So 43
Dude,
is like two before the real thing, right? We'll have like 44 episodes of lead
yep,
up to the draft, and so we're like T-1
yep.
uh and ready to go. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get that
Dude,
rolling.
I can't wait. It's funny because when we first talked about doing the show, which was like last August we launched, you were like, let's start right away so we can work out the kinks. I don't know that we needed to work out kinks for an entire calendar year
It's fair.
before
But
the
also
draft.
but also like not only working out the kinks, but having people find us and either hate
This is
us
true.
or not hate us,
This
right?
is true. This is true. It has taken a long time to cultivate our following of tens of listeners. But yeah, man, I agree. I'm excited. We are what 11 days away from day one of the 2024 MLB draft. Let me ask you this, because I feel like you've been doing a lot of writing recently, and I have been doing a bit less at Twins Daily, Brewer Fanatic, and Northside Baseball. Do you feel ready? How like ready to go do you feel, or do you still need these final 11 days? Where are you at, man?
Uh I think that it feels different because of the year, right? Last year the Twins were drafting
For
five,
sure. Yep.
um, so there was more like, is this real smoke? Is this fake
Mm-hmm.
smoke? And this year it's like, well, whatever's going to happen is just going to happen, and then it's just being ready for that group of guys, right? Who might be in that group. And the further down the draft you go, the bigger that group gets. So
Yep.
last year drafting five, is it just five or is it six? And who's that
Mm-hmm.
six? And so this year it's like, who's 21, who's 17, like who are, and these groups are going to be big. And I mean, when the Twins got Brooks Lee, there was some surprises. I think he was eighth, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple like, what just happened before eight. So
Yep.
there's two and a half times the opportunity for what just
Cade
happened
Horton.
to
Cade
happen, right?
Horton being one of those,
And
right?
Kumar Rocker, right?
Yeah.
Also,
Yep.
and so I think that's kind of the thing. Like as far as being ready, I've seen the names, I know the names. You could probably go deeper in on some of these guys, but as far as prep for, and I think that it's probably the same in draft rooms too, right? If you have the 21st pick, you can run through all sorts of
Oh my
different
gosh.
combinations and permutations of how these picks are going to go. But the
Yep.
reality is you have to have 21 guys in order, um, and then you can take the top guy off that list, and so that
Mm-hmm.
becomes a little bit, more debate. And I think you have more time than once the draft starts, right? You're crossing guys off, and then just trying to settle on who that guy's going to be. So yeah, I'm ready for it just because I don't like waiting for things, and we're going to have to wait for the draft and then wait 20 more picks for the Twins
So
draft.
so much speculation.
Right.
So much speculation. Speaking of Brooks Lee, happy MLB debut day. Congratulations to him. We are recording on Wednesday, July 3rd. Already recorded or already got his first Major League Baseball knock, a single to center field at time of recording. So that's exciting. Things aren't going so well for David Festa tonight, but early days for him. Before we jump in, Jeremy, on all the things that we're going to talk about today, we should do some quick housekeeping stuff because we are getting really close, as you mentioned, to draft day now. So first thing I want to mention is some ways that folks can support the show. You can find us on Twitter at DTS_pod1. You can also follow us on YouTube at Destination the Show, all one word there. A couple of reminders of big things that we have coming up the night before the draft, which is Saturday, July 13th. You and I are going to be hosting a Twins 2024 draft Twitter space, which I informed you about about 30 minutes ago. So
That was like, was it yesterday that we talked about this?
yeah,
You did it last year, and
I did a few.
and I listened to the draft night one, and I'm like, I don't know how this works, but I see that I can hear you coming out of my computer. So I'm fully confident that you'll be able to make that end work,
Gonna be
and
great.
then I'll just talk about the draft, which is something that I look forward to doing. So I
Yes,
don't
sir.
really know how it all works. It just comes out of Twitter somehow, right? X, is it still, are they still called Twitter Spaces? Or are they called X?
We're doing Twitter Spaces, dude. I will never call it X.
Yeah.
So the purpose for that is if you're a crammer, right? If you're the person who doesn't complete your college assignment until 30 minutes before the deadline, that space is going to be for you. We're going to go over everything, picks, bonus pool, possible options at 21, some possible options at 33, even though, as you kind of alluded to, that is like truly a fool's errand this year, but we're fools and we'll try it anyway. So that should be really fun. That's going to be next Saturday, July 13th at 8 p.m. Central. We'll have some stuff up on social media coming for that. Hope if folks are interested, you get a chance to join us. And then on draft
but hold
night,
on,
Jared.
what you're
Yeah, go
saying,
ahead.
what you're saying about Saturday is, if you're a crammer, you're probably not listening to all 43 episodes of us. So you're going to
Yeah,
want to
right.
you're going to want to tell your friends about the Twitter
Yes.
space, because you're
Yes.
not going to have to cram if you're 43 episodes deep
Mhm.
into listening to this podcast. So yeah, but that'll be fun. Hopefully we reach an audience that's into the draft, and we can
For sure.
go into the weeds, which is where you like to spend so much of your time.
It is, but you know what? We're gonna try and walk the fine line between like making it accessible. So if you're interested in the MLB draft, but you don't really know a lot about it and you want to know more, come, because we'll walk through some of the basics of and the mechanics of how it works, in addition to talking through some of the prospects. And then Sunday, July 14th, Jeremy, day one kicks off. What are we doing for that, man?
So whenever that draft starts, which I don't believe we have a exact start time yet, it's usually evening time.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be hitting go live, and between me, you, Theo, and some guests,
Yep.
we'll be talking draft all night long. So
All night.
it's really just us watching the draft and geeking out about what's happening.
Yep.
So if you're into that sort of thing, we did the goal. We went live last week. Didn't have a lot of viewers at the time.
It worked. It worked.
But it did work, and that was what we were trying to do. So
For sure.
that should be fun. We'll be bouncing in and out to cover some of our other responsibilities at the websites, but that should be good and fun. And like we mentioned last week, I think you'll probably be breaking picks to me, because I feel like you're closer to the moon, or however this works, where you get reception of things before I do. So no, it should be fun. It should be a good time. We're going to stay live. The plan is all night, unless we're doing terrible.
But
And
nah, we're gonna do it all night, no matter what. I don't even care.
yeah,
It's gonna be
no,
great.
that'll be good. And that's kind of a long night. It's what's almost 80 picks.
Yep.
So yeah, that'll be a good a good run. The ramp up to what we've been bracing ourselves for
For
all
sure.
year.
A test of stamina, and the goal, right, is to create some community around the draft. If you are a Twins, Brewers, or Cubs fan, Twins or Brewers, much more flush with picks and money. But welcome everybody to that space. I have found the TV coverage of the draft to be a little bit suboptimal, and so we hope that providing a little bit of a team-specific spin on how the process is going, who are the prospects that are being taken, having team-specific guests will enliven things for folks. So hope people get an opportunity to join us again. We'll be promoting that on social media in the coming week. But today we're going to talk about pitching, and more pitching. And you, my friend, have been doing a lot of writing about pitching prospects for the 2024 class. So I'm curious, as you were kind of going through that process, before we start digging in on guys and this and that and the next thing, curious if like two questions. One, what was your overall impression of those demographics? And then two, do you have a favorite guy that you want to share right off the bat?
Yeah, so did a piece that just covered some college pitchers and some prep pitchers. I feel like the top of the college ranks with Hagen Smith and Chase Burns is really good, but obviously those guys are going to be gone, right? It's going to be in the top 8, 9, 10 picks. So even as far as looking at those guys for any of these three teams, not likely to happen. Trey Savage is going to come off the board sometime in that group, and then to me, there's kind of a drop.
For sure.
Brody Brecht is a high ceiling. I don't want to necessarily say low floor, but high ceiling with a lot of varieties of outcomes, right?
With a bullpen floor.
Right. And that I mean, that could be very playable, right? With his arsenal. And I would expect him to go somewhere in that back half of the first round. And I think maybe he could creep into consideration in the middle of the first round. But then you kind of have a drop off. And I think that plays okay into what the Twins and Brewers like to do. And the Cubs with less picks, they went kind of off the board with Jackson Wiggins last year, so it's hard, a little bit harder to project where that's going to go.
Power arms, dude. Power arms with Cade Horton the year before too. I'm really interested if Savage is on the board at 14 for them, if that's a pool that they dip their toes in the water of, so to speak.
And then as far as favorites, I think that the easy for me my favorite's Hagen Smith.
Same.
That's going to matter. The switch pitcher from Mississippi State.
CJ. Yep.
Say his name again.
Gerangelo Cincha.
Yeah. So he's got both a great name.
Yeah. Yep.
And drafted by the Brewers last year. Naturally a left-handed pitcher, but is better as a right-handed pitcher.
So wild.
And so that's kind of a crazy, like the backstory there is crazy. The human interest story there is kind of crazy. So that'll be interesting because last year when he was drafted, it wasn't, was it last year or 2 years ago? Whenever it
was a couple years ago. Yeah.
It was like, wait a second, is this a real thing?
Right.
And then it's like all of a sudden now he's crept up to the top of the board. So he was actually, I want to say, the highest profile guy that I covered in my article. The other name, and we're going to get to some of these names, but Ryan Johnson from Dallas Baptist is interesting, and really kind of fits what I think the Twins like to do, is find kind of not unearthed guys, but guys that they think maybe haven't reached their full potential. Yep. And what you see, and this is a huge generalization, right? If you are playing for a big time college, there's probably less projection, right? If you're from Wake Forest, what you see is what you're going to get more times than not. If you're an SEC guy, what you see is what you get more times than not. When you go to the lesser developed, lesser coached places where the Twins have had so much success recently, right? David,
like Western Carolina, yeah, right.
That to me is what you're trying to find. And so Ryan Johnson, someone I mentioned, he throws a little bit harder. One thing the Twins have done, again in a generalization, because they have taken harder throwing guys, a guy like Ryan Prager, who doesn't necessarily throw super hard, is going to go that first night. Texas A&M guy, is there something the Twins could do to get 5 more miles on his fastball, and now all of a sudden he's a huge problem.
Yep.
Right.
Love that.
And so he to me is an interesting guy. And there's just a lot of, half of the guys that are going to get drafted are going to be pitchers, right?
Yep.
So Daniel Egan, a guy from Presbyterian College, would be another really interesting name. But again, there's 30 teams, and there's one team that's going to pick these guys.
Yep.
Right. So you might really, really like a guy. We've actually had this conversation. Sometimes you really, really like a guy and you don't get the opportunity to draft him. And then he becomes someone that you maybe pick up in a trade later.
Yep.
So as far as favorite guys out of this college group, I do like Daniel Egan, the Presbyterian pitcher. Right now, as of publishing, he was 129 on the consensus board.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually moved up now to 120. He's in a few top 100s, so I don't necessarily see him as a first day guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the prep side, and this is again what I say my favorite demographic, because the range of outcomes is like Chris Lindahl should sponsor the prep pitching demographic, right?
There you go.
Because you can see a guy that you think is going to be the next big thing that never does anything, right? And then you can have a guy that you draft in the 8th round or the 12th round or the 13th round that all of a sudden is signs and becomes the man. So, the big names there, the Caminiti kid's going to be gone, right? I don't know that he drops out of the top 12.
I agree.
Ryan Sloan, an Illinois kid, and you always wonder with these Midwest guys, how much are they actually pitching, right? What more do they have in the tank?
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, say what you.
I was just gonna say I don't know how much more he needs to have in the tank because he's already brushing 100 now. Ryan Sloan,
right,
I guess.
Right, and committed to Wake Forest, right? So if he goes there, there's going to be something more developed, right? The high school guys just aren't naturally as polished as anything, right? If Paul Skeens would have been drafted out of high school, he's developing into Paul Skeens that we know, but I don't even think he was drafted out of high school, right?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Went to the Air Force for 2 years and then ends up at LSU, and then the storybook ending with the gymnast, and if you haven't heard that story. But then there's a lot of guys on that list. The Dax Whitney story is probably the most fun story, right? And really just kind of you can attribute that to if you can get it done, people will find you without spending thousands of dollars to have your own perfect game bio. He's a kid that wanted to play with his I was going to say club team. I don't know.
His Legion team. Yeah.
His Legion team.
Yeah.
And they just discovered him 6'5", 190. Like, you look at a guy like that and you're like, let's get him in the system.
Yeah.
And the reality is you could have 5-6 guys in your system like that and maybe only one pans out. Right.
Right.
And there's a lot of things. I was just actually reading a book because I do that occasionally. I read.
That shocks me to my very core.
That talked about like the homesickness being such a huge variable, and now I don't think that necessarily it wasn't even a baseball book. Actually, it might have been, but it's like that. That's just, you get these kids out of comfort, right, for the first time in their life. High school kids more than college kids, right? College kids have kind of been on their own, but you take a prep kid from Blackfoot High School in Idaho,
right,
and plug them into any complex city. Florida, Arizona, there's going to be opportunities to do more things. And I know for a fact there was a Twins pitching prospect that came from not that sort of life that got way too into that sort of life.
Yep.
Right. Still made it to the major leagues, still, made good money throwing a baseball around. But it's like, if he would have focused on pitching and less on the other stuff, could have been a completely different story, right? So I mean, there's paths that you take, and I actually had talked to a friend of that guy, and he just said, we hope he shows up every day and that we don't hear that he's in a ditch somewhere, like that type of stuff that you get out of mom and dad's view for the first time ever. And that's at 18, and international guys at 16. Right. So, I mean, there's so many different paths. And I think the Twins, cause I can speak a little more than the other organizations, do a really good job of educating, taking care of, and really trying to develop humans too. And I think that's why we've been able to see, in today's Baseball America list, that the Twins have the second most prospects in the top 100, trailing only the Cubs, right?
Yep.
And so I think there's so many variables, but the human variable is obviously a huge one. So And thanks for Theo to point out that since we're both educators, we should be reading.
Theo is
Right?
back and making fun of us, and you have also set a record for the longest answer to a question on this podcast.
You wanted both. You wanted both demos. You wanted favorites. You asked me a really long question.
That's fair. That's fair. Excellent job all around. Okay, so but I want to ask you I want to get you on the record, man, because you know, we need to get some receipts. We need to carry some receipts forward from before draft times. One thing I want to touch on real quick is there's been a lot made about this draft class not being that exciting, and I think that's fair. It's evidenced by a lack of up the middle defenders. It's evidenced by a lack of shortstops, and it's evidenced by a lack of really good prep bats. Where I do think this class is interesting is pitching depth.
Okay.
There was 35 pitchers in the top 100 profiles in the 2023 consensus board, and right now there's 43 in the 2024 version.
Okay.
And those are almost completely equally split, between prep and college. There's 21 prep guys and 22 there's 21 college guys and 22 prep guys, a much healthier number of left-handers, 15 this year versus 8 last year. And so we've touched on this a bit. Like, whatever your flavor of pitching prospect is, power guy who can spin the ball, pinpoint control, you're going to be able to find them somewhere within this top 100. So with one major caveat, which is that I think you would agree with me here. Correct me if you think I'm off base. I think it's still fair to expect that most of the pitching that the Brewers and Twins take is going to be in the mid to late rounds. Fair?
Yeah, I think
college pitching anyway.
Yep. No, I think that's completely fair. For the reason that's kind of what they do. For the other reason is when there's a lack of hitting depth, that now gets pushed up the board.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Because if you want it, you better get it now. We can maybe get that pitcher later. And I think it's possible too that draft boards reflect that kind of right away. Right. We don't have that shortstop, or we don't have that many shortstops. So the one that we do have is going to kind of float to the board, top of the board quicker. And so, yeah, I think that it's fair to say there's more depth in the top 100, but that may be just as much a reflection of the lack of other stuff than it is pitching. But you got to have 100 picks in the top 100, right?
For sure. 100%. So let me start getting you on the record here, because I picked out basically all those guys that you talked through. I kind of want to ask you essentially like a quick fire question about, or to order in some way, or to get your thoughts on kind of a preference for a particular organization. So you brought up Brody Brecht, who's really interesting. Here's my question. Is Brody Brecht more likely to be taken at 17 by the Brewers or 21 by the Twins, and why?
I would say he's more likely to be taken at 21 by the Twins because of just where he fits on the board. I feel like there will be more options because that's how math works for the Brewers at 17. And to me, he's that third guy or that fourth guy, but 17 feels too early. And so the Brewers do like the flame throwing, usually junior college guys, but I don't see them taking Brecht at 17. I could foresee a scenario where the Twins draft him at 21. I don't find it very likely, but I would vote more likely at 21 than 17. I do think that he will fall past the Twins at 21. Come off the board shortly after that.
Okay. Yeah, Brecht's super interesting, and the reason I wanted to ask is I don't think it's super likely either. I think I might be inclined to disagree with you and say more likely at 17. Just because it seems like the Twins favor or have favored strike throwers. But maybe that's only a fair kind of ascription for later rounds in the draft. There's been steam connecting Breck to the Twins and the Brewers, and I'm not sure if I really buy any of it.
It's that Midwest thing.
Yeah, I don't really get it. Okay, let me ask you about another guy, Jeremy. So we have really not talked about this guy since the beginning of the season, and I think that we have talked about some guys over the course of the year who maybe haven't had their best season, but they've maybe fallen a little bit too far out of the conversation. Like we talked about Mike Sirota the other week.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are other examples. Jonathan Santucci is a guy we literally have not had a conversation about since the college season got going. He's a left-handed pitcher out of Duke. He's currently 37th on the consensus board. At the beginning of the college season, he was living in the 12 to 18 range on most boards. Had a little bit of a spotty 2024. Left-handed is obviously a bonus. Fastball is up to 96 with solid characteristics. Really good slider. Solid changeup. So he has 3 concrete established pitches. Pitched pretty well. Do you think that Santucci is an option for the Twins or the Brewers? And I'm noting that because they have a pick at 33 and 34 respectively. And the Twins, if we rewind a couple of drafts, took college lefties in back-to-back rounds with Steven Hajar out of Michigan and then Cade Povich, now unfortunately of the Baltimore Orioles, but pitching in the major leagues, out of Nebraska. I think that was the second and third round of that draft. So curious if you think Santucci might be someone of interest.
So the Twins drafted 2 Big Ten guys, is what you're telling me. Two Midwestern Big Ten guys. Yeah.
Yep.
I think Santucci fits in that comp round, in the supplemental round. I believe in my last mock I had him go to the Rockies, because I'm a firm believer that the Rockies have to do kind of the opposite of what most teams do, in that they need to draft their pitchers, because you're not getting pitchers to willingly, not good pitchers usually anyway, willingly come to Colorado for the same amount that they'll go pitch somewhere else. And so I think Colorado drafts 38, Twins are 33, Brewers are 34. I do think that's kind of the sweet spot for him. I don't necessarily foresee either team taking him 33, 34. Because like we said at the jump, you're going to get the depth of pitchers for both of these teams later, right? And so unless he's really, really high on either of those boards and he just happens to be the best guy available, I don't see that. I wouldn't hate it for either of those teams. You're going to get a little bit more advanced guy, North Carolina guy. So you're pitching more, right? And I think that the Twins like to kind of sneak up that coast a little bit further anyway. And so they have drafted the state of North Carolina. I don't necessarily think they've drafted a lot of guys from Duke.
Nope.
But I see that as the sweet spot for him in the 30s.
Yeah.
But I don't know that he's necessarily going to be the top option for either team.
I agree. And I wanted to ask you, because someone reached out and asked about him and why we never talk about him. And I think that is a fair question, because he was such a prominent guy on the board, and then just literally has fallen out the conversation, nationally even.
Right.
And I think another thing in the anti-Santucci, I think I really like Santucci. The Twins or Brewers drafting Santucci camp is also just their bonus pools. Both the Twins and the Brewers are in this relatively strong position when it comes to money compared to their first round pick, right? So the Brewers pick at 17, the Twins at 21. They have ballpark 12 million bonus pools, which are good for 11th and 12th in all of Major League Baseball, when they should be, 17th and 21st. But they're not, because of the Corbin Burns pick for the Brewers, a Sonny Gray pick for the Twins. They both have Comp B picks this year. The amount of money they both have kind of makes it incumbent that they take a prep somewhat early, right? On day one. Otherwise, unless, and maybe you do what the Brewers did last year, right? Where they get weird and go underslot, and get Cooper Pratt, who now is a fringy top 100 prospect.
Future
But
game.
Is he going to the Futures game? I missed
believe
that.
I saw his name on the list. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that's the other thing too. Like if you have, and there's a whole bunch of college pitchers, right? At this point, that's where the depth is. So then it becomes hey, would you sign for 200,000 under slot?
Right.
Oh, you won't? Okay, we're gonna go to the next guy on the list.
Right.
Will you sign for $200,000 slot? Because if you say no and you fall, now you're not signing for $200,000 under slot. You're signing for $700,000 less, or whatever the case is, right? So that could be a sneaky move, right? Where you take a tumbling college pitcher that now fits in this big group. You take that guy with your comp pick, and then you turn around and say, now we have more money to take that prep pitcher that has a huge price tag in the 60s or in the 80s or in the 6th round. And so that's kind of where Santucci has the advantage. Is I think he's the next highest guy, but the disadvantage is if they take the hitters below him, he then becomes part of that next tier that I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. And if those guys are happy with the money of a 45th pick at 33, that's obviously an option that happens, because that's the game that's the game within the game, right? You're not doing the NBA or the NFL draft where you're just trying to take the best guy. You have to worry
the best guy at the right price.
Correct.
So, okay, so you mentioned the next tier, right? So we're going to move through kind of 2 more tiers of college pitching before we switch to prep. So there's another cluster in the 40s. You mentioned a couple of these guys already. So you've got Luke Holman, who's these are all right-handed pitchers, all college righties. Luke Holman, who's a righty out of LSU. He took over from Thatcher Hurd as their Friday night starter this year, just posted consistently all year. Ben Hess, right-handed pitcher from Alabama. Big frame dude, like 6'5", big stuff. Really, really poor production this year. And then Ryan Johnson, who you alluded to, who, if you guys haven't seen Ryan Johnson, look up clips of him, because he's like stalking around the mound, and like he's a very intense presence. He's interesting because his pitch mix is really I was going to say weird. It's not weird. He does what works for him, which is he throws like 50% sliders, which is a really nasty pitch. His fastball's been over 100, though. He's at 47. So let me try and be as specific and put you on the spot as possible. Do you have a strong feeling or a preference for one of these 3 guys? Who is it and why?
Yeah, I think Johnson, just because he's got a little more ceiling. And you on your board, you mentioned Hess, Holman, and then there's a Vanderbilt pitcher too. So there's 3 SEC pitchers. Yeah. Boom, boom, boom. All 6'4" or taller. 2 of them under. Well, Johnson's 215. And I just think the ceiling's a little bit higher. The floor's maybe not as high, but that's a risk that I'd be willing to take. I think the Twins have drafted from Dallas Baptist before.
Cody Funderburg.
They've also gone the route of Alabama, right? So they actually took 2 pitchers from Alabama 2 years ago. And there was a lot of talk at that time how the relationship was with the Alabama coaching staff. And staffs turn around so quick that I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore. But for me, it's Johnson. He's not necessarily, I don't think, what the Twins are looking for with the already explosive fastball. But they do on occasion draft guys like that, right? But for me, organization aside, I would take that. I would take him just because I think that's the highest ceiling.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next group. One more cluster here before we move on to prep guys, which I know is like really, really your favorite demographic. So we talked about lefty guys, right? So Twins Kajar and Cade Povich in consecutive rounds. There's two lefties that I think are both very interesting. Gage Jump is a left-handed pitcher. He's 67th on the board at the moment, out of LSU, transfer from UCLA. Fastball 92, 95. Good characteristics on that pitch. Just like a fairly polished arsenal overall. Finished 2024 with a 3.47 ERA, 101 strikeouts and 22 walks in 83 innings. That's really respectable numbers in the SEC. And then Ryan Prager, who you mentioned off the jump, his fastball a little bit less velocity, typically sitting 91, 93, but he can get up to 23 inches of induced vertical break on that pitch, which is beyond elite. And then an above average slider. He just took steps forward with the level of consistency and strike throwing this year. For Texas A&M, made a College World Series Championship Series appearance for Texas A&M. 3.10 ERA, struck out 114 hitters and walked 19 in 87 innings. Any of these lefties float your boat, Jeremy? How do you feel about Jump and Prager?
I prefer Prager. I mean, I believe he won game 1, right? Before Texas A&M lost game 2 and game 3. And so I think, just the body type, this, like we said, his fastball is not extraordinary right now, but I think there could be some more there. I don't see a lot of, was he 6'3"?
6'3", 200 listed.
And
versus 6 foot 200 for Jump.
Right. And so I would guess, though, Jump had probably been seen, that the Twins really do scout Southern California heavily. So he would have been really well known at UCLA. And obviously, every team is scouting the SEC. Yeah, every team's scouting UCLA too. But for me, that's Prager. And it wouldn't shock me if Prager went 15, 16, 18 spots higher than this consensus board spot, just because I think there's some teams put a lot of stock into what have you done for me lately, right?
Yep.
Like Cade Horton. And so Prager, if the Twins left day one with Prager and one of the prep guys and 2 hitters, that'd be a great draft, because he's got a higher floor, right?
Yep.
And there's a ton of movement. And is when you don't throw straight pitches, I think we got to see David Festa throwing a real dart fastball, and it just gets turned around by major league hitters, right?
Yep.
And that's the old. I maybe told this story before, but talking about one of the Twins pitchers, when one of the hitters told me, they said he makes 96 look like 86 because it doesn't move, and so that to me would be if there's movement, if that ball starts to do its thing, that there's value there. So I'm a Prager fan, and it wouldn't shock me if he went 50-ish.
Yep, I agree with that. I like both those lefties, actually. I think they're both intriguing, and certainly just to reiterate, a much more healthy, robust class of left-handed pitchers in the top 100 than 2023. I think close to double the number. Okay, let's move on to the prep side. This is where things get really interesting. You've said it's your favorite demographic, the type that you can dream on. You have to cross the challenging health journey, right, of getting to like 21, 22 years old without major issues, which I think makes some teams really wary of drafting a prep pitcher in the first round. So we're going to try and walk through some guys. There are really 3 guys who are on the prep side kind of expected to be first round picks. Cash Mayfield, who's a lefty. William Schmidt, big righty, committed to LSU. There's some talk that he might be thinking about going to school, which would be interesting. And then Ryan Sloan out of Illinois, up to 100 on the fastball. I hate to give you a guiding question here, right? But I know the Twins have taken a prep righty in the back of the first round before in Chase Petty. it just feels more likely to me that both the Twins and the Brewers would be more interested in this prep demographic at pick 33 and pick 34 respectively rather than 17 or 21. Do you agree with that? And if so, kind of or not? And like, what's your rationale there? Curious for your thought process.
Yeah, the one thing, and I think the reason that I like the prep pitching demographic is because you feel like you know where they're going to go, and then they keep tumbling, right? And more often than not, it has to do with a bonus demand. Also, more often than not, somebody meets that demand. And so I think Caminiti is who we aren't talking about, but I think he's pretty likely to go off the board right now. Almost everybody projects he's going to San Francisco.
Yeah,
I
like
think that
top
happens.
14. Yep.
Yep. And then after that, I can see some college pitchers. You know, I don't know if Brett goes, but there's the opportunity to draft some college pitchers. I think it's going to be hitter crazy, right? From 14 to 22, 23. And I think the whole time we'll be like, hey, when is the next prep pitcher going to get popped?
And it's Compe.
And it, well, I don't think it necessarily will be, because I think you have teams like the Orioles who have so much stuff that they could be like, hey, let's add some prep pitching depth.
The Padres have taken a prep, surely. They've done it like 8 drafts in a row.
For sure. The Dodgers, I think at 23, they could do it. The Braves at 24, sounds like they're going to do it, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Padres at 25. I don't think the Yankees at 26 would be afraid to do it. The Phillies at 27 have had a ton of success with prep pitching. Astros at 28. The Diamondbacks can pretty much do whatever they want.
Yeah, because they got the 3 picks. Yep.
And so I think the guys that you mentioned there, Mayfield, Schmidt, Sloan, that sweet spot is really going to be 23 through whenever they go off the board. And could it be at 33 or 34, or is that going to be the next group of prep pitchers that we start to see? Because there's right behind those guys, there's another group of them.
Yes.
And really, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but what are these guys asking for? Because they could go to college, which would be a terrible, terrible idea, where they're going to have their arms just destroyed. Or they could take a few $1 million now to start their professional career and get college paid for when and if it doesn't work out for them.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm drawn to the demo at 33 and 34. There's certainly a possibility one or two, all 3 of those guys could fall. I just think that back half of the first round is really going to be the sweet spot for prep pitching.
Theo says in the chat that the Saints are down 22-6. Not going well.
So one team went for 2, and the Saints missed their extra point.
Oh, Lordy. Okay, so let's talk about the next crop. This is actually the cluster, I think, dude, that I'm most, because we'll talk about the lefties too. There's a couple of lefties I want to touch on. This is the cluster I'm most interested in. So apologies in advance, this is going to be like a little bit long-winded, but you've kind of alluded to this, and I want to make the kind of direct link. There's a cluster of preps from like 40 to 75 on the consensus board that if they're drafted, they're going to make Compe money. Forget about their position on the consensus board. It's irrelevant. They're going to be $1.5 to $2.5 million arms. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of those guys, because I think this is a cluster that makes a ton of sense for the Brewers and Twins, given their picks at 33 and 34 and their augmented bonus pools. So Braylon Dowdy, he's a right-handed pitcher out of California. He's 40th on the board. The Twins have been explicitly linked to him by a ton of guys. That's usually not accurate. Like, the Twins don't usually have like actual steam out there, so that'll be interesting to monitor. Joey Oki, right-handed pitcher out of Iowa. We've talked a decent amount about the Twins. Definitely had people down to see him a couple of nights ago. That could just be coincidental, because the Iowa high school season is one of the few that is still going on right now. He's currently 46th. Bryce Message, he's a right-handed pitcher out of New Jersey, 60th on the board. Chris Lavonis, also out of New Jersey, a personal favorite of mine, I think, at 67. And then Dax Whitney, who you alluded to earlier in the podcast, a very kind of what you would call like a projectable frame out of Idaho, which is just awesome. I just can't imagine folks and evaluators making their travel plans to Idaho. That's a lot of dudes. The Twins have been explicitly linked with Doughty. I think who one of his major kind of traits or strengths is spinning the ball, and that's something I associate more with the Brewers actually than the Twins. Lavonis is someone who's interesting to me, kind of projectable frame. I think Joe Doyle, when he was on Compton to Griffin Jacks, which is interesting. I think there's a Chase Petty is actually a solid comp for Chris Lavonis. Any favorites or preferences from this group? And do you think it's feasible that either the Brewers or Twins pop from this cluster of names at 33 and 34?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's not this group, but the prep demo, I think, is how I would, if I was betting on it, it would be the favored demo. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Brewers love guys that can spin it. And if Doughty is that guy, that makes sense. But as far as my favorites and what I think the Twins like, Joey Oki's a Midwest guy, right? That seems like a thing that would certainly make sense. But then you also mentioned the Northeast guys, the New Jersey guys, and that's another place that
I've done that before.
Like Cody Stashak was I think a New York guy. I mean, he was St. John's, but that's David Festa was from up there.
Seton Hall, yeah.
And so I could see both. And it's pronounced message. A double C makes the S sound. Is that
I could be off on that. I've heard it pronounced as message. So someone can correct me if I'm off, and I will apologize and get myself together. There were definitely. Let's just preview this right now, real quick, before you go on, Jeremy. We are going to make a ton of pronunciation errors on guys further down the board. With full apologies to those prospects, we will gladly fix it and get it right if and when we're corrected.
So I think that there's always with Northeast guys, you could swing and miss badly, right? Or you could find a diamond in the rough. And the Twins are going to take the projectable. What can we do with this pitch? And these guys all seem to throw hard, and I think that's just something that you see more and more now with prep guys.
Yep.
And so, Whitney's the intriguing one because it's like he's Idaho. He's just jumped up, right? He wasn't even on your board.
No, he's brand new.
I like pop-up guys like that. There's more risk there. I mean, if you're giving me the option, all money's the same. I think Joey Oki would probably be where I would go. Gun to my head. So, that from that group, and I think it makes a lot of sense for these guys to be in consideration. Starting in comp round and probably all going if they and they'll all sign if they go on the first day. But I mean, you could see some of these guys work with the team that has picks later and just kind of float them down and say, you might be the 78th pick or the 97th pick, but we're going to pay you like the 35th pick.
Yep, for sure. So quick highlights on those guys. Doughty, the spin thing I mentioned, upwards of 3,000 RPMs on his breaking stuff. That's pretty elite. Oki is really interesting. He's like an atypical pitch mix, but it's 2+ pitches, right? Fastball's been up to 97, the sweeper up to 20 inches of horizontal movement. That's nasty. I wonder about adding a four-seamer with him because he doesn't really throw one right now, and I think it makes a lot of sense with his secondary stuff. And then the message, just like a typical prep story, right? And we had a question that alluded to this last week, like a velo jump. Now he's throwing 96 with a good breaking ball. He can also spin the ball pretty good too, as can Lavonis. So I could get excited about a lot of these prep righties were the Twins or Brewers to dig into that demographic at 33 and 34. And one thing I'll add before we finish on the lefties, you can scoot down to pick 60, I think is the next Twins pick. And I apologize, I forget the exact next Brewers pick after they have 34. You can scoot right on down next to the Brewers and Twins next pick and do the same thing with 7, 8, 9, 10 more prep guys that are
Right.
also very interesting, right? So if it's not this cluster, this conversation is transferable to the next group down the board, I think. But I do think it's highly likely that both the Brewers and Twins dig in here somewhere. Two lefties I want to dig in on quick, Jeremy. So David Shields, he's sitting at 55 on the board, and then Dasan Hill, a lefty, sitting at 58. So David Shields is a guy we haven't talked about much. Two-sport athlete, football and baseball. Only recently focusing on baseball. 6'2", 210. Very good. Or very kind of like repeatable actions on the mound. Not as much velocity as some of the other guys, sitting 91, 93. He's much more of a polished kind of profile. And then Dasan Hill, I think he's out of Grapevine, Texas.
Yep.
Listed at 6'4", 175. I got to believe that weight is out of date anymore. But if you want to talk about what do folks mean when they say like projection, that is what they mean. A guy who you can assume you can add like 20 pounds plus to. Fastball took a jump and is now sitting 91, 93, but up to 94, 95 with a good slider and kind of two distinct breaking balls in his slider and his curveball. Also a changeup that's kind of emerging there. The Twins have not popped a prep lefty on day one in their last 3 drafts. Curious if any of those guys intrigue you. Maybe I'm missing somebody and you're about to correct me.
No, they should end that streak, and they should draft David Shields.
Tell me more.
He to me, like when I was researching this, the preps, that was the guy that I'm like, sign me up for him, right? You play football and baseball. I know that's whenever you have a guy like that, you're like, okay, there's once you focus, you'll get better. That's not always true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all of the things that are intriguing, right? That's intriguing to me. He's a Pennsylvania guy, right? He's a Northeast where you can't go baseball year round unless you're traveling. And maybe he does, but if you're playing football, yeah, you're probably not, right? And so that to me intriguing. Reclassified, right? 17.
There you go.
Okay? That's gonna bring you up on analytical teams models, right?
Yep.
Which the Twins are, and so what is he, 90, 92-ish?
91, 93, I think, in the write-up we have.
So like I say, hey, get him in the Twin system. Let's add 5.
I mean, that's also as a 17-year-old, right? So you can even ascribe just like general strength adding velocity, regardless of the fact that we know that the Twins have a niche of being able to improve velocity in general, as evidenced by the gazillion guys with whom they've done that.
Yep. And so you talked about how he was more polished. The stuff I read is all about how, he's a very good athlete, right? And at 6'2", 210, he's maybe not going to put on a ton of weight. MLB has Hill at 6'5", 165.
So that's even lighter than I gave him 10 extra pounds, apparently.
So I think there's just, to me, it's like, yeah, sure, Hill, super projectable at 6'5", 165 or 175. And maybe that ceiling is higher. But I really like Shields, and I think that would be I don't foresee them leaving day one with 2 prep pitchers, because I think they're just going to draft so many pitchers later. I think the Indians, when they were the Indians, had a draft of all pitchers at one point, or like 20 out of 21 or 19 out of 20. I look at the system and I'm like, you don't draft for need, but man, if we could just add like an influx of younger pitchers, and this is where you got to get them. Oki and Shields to me would be two really fun names to walk out of day one with. If you go college hitter first, and get those two guys second, third, and then they're going to take that Luke Keeschel / Tanner Schobel type infielder on day one as well. So I would love to see the draft go that way for the Twins on day one.
Yep. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap it up there. We crammed in probably 15 guys, I think, that we talked about there, and obviously we're gonna spend the majority of time talking about guys kind of closer to the top of the board, top 100 guys. As we say, there's a ton more intriguing arms in this draft. I want to finish. I'm trying to do a better job of bookending with things that are coming up. So,
can I ask one question first?
Yeah, of course.
Did we get any emails this week?
We didn't get any emails. Actually, though, what we did get is someone commenting nice things on our live stream YouTube episode. So thank you to that person.
Do you have it in front of you? We could wish them well. Wish them happy
happy Fourth. New comment, Matthew Buckler. Great video. Love the coverage of all three teams and the draft prospects. Thanks, Matthew. We appreciate you. Want to finish with just a couple of reminders about things that are coming up, ways that you can support the show. Twitter at DTS_pod1, on YouTube at Destination the Show, all one word there. As Jeremy alluded to, we do have an email address. If you want to send us a question, and I did not do a great job pushing for them this week, you can email us, and that's destinationtheshow@gmail.com. And things that we have coming up. Saturday, July 13th, 8 p.m. Central, we will be hosting a Twins-specific Twitter space. I'm guessing we're going to plan for that to go an hour. Bet it goes longer. And we'll be doing night before day one homework, essentially, for people. Picks, money, prospects to know. And then the first day of the 2024 MLB Draft, that is Sunday, July 14th. Exact time TBD, but we'll have social media stuff. We'll have graphics announcing it, all that good stuff. And we will be doing a live stream throughout the whole of day one, giving Brewers, Cubs, and Twins specific reaction, along with fun guests from Twins Daily, from Brewer Fanatic, from Northside Baseball. So stay on the lookout for that. Hope you guys get a chance to join us at one or both of those. And until next time, thanks for listening.